Hey. Hi,
Hey,
good morning. Wow, is
morning.
that up there?
Sorry?
Is that Africa on that picture up there?
No,
No?
that's
I know. I first looked,
some Swiss picturesque Filipinos, I guess.
yeah, sorry for mixing that up. It first looked like the savannah or something, when I saw it halfway. Good to see
Yeah, I
you.
know what you mean. Apologies for the delay once more. I am experiencing technical difficulties with my laptop always, and probably why I should change it, but I hope it's not too bad.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, these things happen. We know that, right? But other than that, how has your day been so far? I mean, it's still morning, but maybe you had other good experiences or
Well, yeah, it's still morning. I'm not working today, so that's a bit of a relief. And just chilled. I have some meetings in the afternoon with Priscilla from the SAS, from school, and we're gonna like do some spontaneous singing. So it's a chilled day today.
very nice. Yeah, I'm actually so curious to learn more about you being chilled because I know you have been doing so much. So I wonder how chilling gets some space in your life. But let me maybe first introduce you officially so everyone understands a bit of who you are and yeah, what your background is. So
Mhm.
you're Tatenda Brian Madziba, a dedicated lawyer from Zimbabwe. You discovered a love and passion for debate and public speaking at a very young age, in high school, actually. And this influenced your decision to study law. After completing your studies, you worked as a lawyer in Zimbabwe for some time until 2019, which marked the year in which you won a category in the prestigious moot court competition in Geneva, in Switzerland. And moot court competitions are simulations, kind of legal proceedings where students of law would argue hypothetical cases for practice. So you won that category, and following that, you got accepted at law schools in Switzerland. You earned yourself a master's degree in International and Comparative Law from the University of Zurich, and then very recently also an LLM, which is a Master of Laws in International Business Law from the University of Fribourg. So congratulations again on this one.
Thank
And
you.
you're now preparing to practice law in Switzerland, where you have been living for the past, as I understand, exactly 5 years this month, right? So
Mhm.
happy anniversary as well.
Thank you.
You also speak 6 languages, and you're eager to add more to the list. You enjoy, as we heard, singing, playing football, and going with the flow of life. So, again, a very warm welcome to this episode of Many First Conversations, where we talk about first time and other life experiences that have taught us something or inspired us in a specific way. So, good to
Thank
have
you very much. Thank you very much for the glowing introduction. And I mean, you really explained the competitions even much better than I remember them when I participated. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And obviously, it's speaking, right? It's impromptu speaking, which should be something hopefully that you enjoy. And it's the topic I would like to start with. So I believe that a lot of people would freeze at the mere thought of having to speak publicly. But you seem to be enjoying it, and you're obviously also very good at it. So could you take us a bit on the journey of how public speaking and debate entered your lives, how you became aware that you have these skills and want to pursue them also as part of your professional career, right?
Mhm. Well, I think it goes back to primary school. So in primary school, it hadn't really hit me that I was pretty decent in debate and public speaking. But it was more the idea that whenever we had like quiz competitions, because we used to have quiz competitions where, we meet with other schools and then they're just asking random facts. Like, I remember remembering this one interesting fact that made us go through the next stage or something. And the question was, which country has like the cow with the longest horns, and we had gone to a museum and I had seen, like these really big horns, and it was written Longhorned Ox from Barotseland. And I was like, wow. So, when they asked this, I said Barotseland, and this guy was so impressed, like he knows the former name, he's even telling us the name that was there before, and I was just like, okay, this is something that everybody should remember, I guess. But then, that was sort of looking back, I think, the beginning. But the beginning was, I think, when I was in high school, Form 1, we call in Zimbabwe. So, like the Tibetan Public Speaking Club was always cool because they had food there, like they had all the nice events every Friday. So like Tibet was an easy way of just going to get food. You go there and, you just know there's like a drink called mazo in Zimbabwe, like which is the favorite orange juice, and some biscuits and sometimes some fancy stuff. But more really, the idea was when you are there, you start appreciating the art, because then they just give you an impromptu topic and say, okay, you have 30 seconds to talk about the blue sky. Your 30 seconds starts now, and it's like a competition. And it was so fascinating to see the wealth of different interpretations that people could have from topics like these. Someone would come and really just blow your mind, and I just got hooked onto it, So by the time I was in Form 3, which is almost towards the end of my junior high school, I was really a frequent speaker, really already having established some sort of a reputation for myself within the debating circuit in the city where I came from. So, yeah, I would say that was the beginning.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And obviously that was not specifically about law cases yet. That was more playful, open, general topics, right? What made you decide then to study law? After all, I mean, there is obviously that aspect of debate, but you could have gone anywhere and use public speaking as a skill, right? In many other fields as well. Why was it law in the end?
Well, it was law because, something, as with many like African kids, there's certain events which sort of shape your outlook or your perspective in the world. And with me, that was the passing of my dad when I was 10, approaching 11, thereabouts. So it was so sudden, and, my life had been really amazing until then. I mean, it still has been amazing. But you can imagine how pampered you'd have been if you were the firstborn, So that sort of made me, like really mature way early, so to speak. And like Zimbabwe is also a country with a lot of conservative, patriarchal cultures sometimes, when the male, like in my case, the father dies, the relatives from the paternal side, they feel they're justified to just come and grab the property to, and in my case, my mother was like young, I think she was 31, 30, so my age. And they were like, yeah, you are, thanks for giving us these kids, and we're going to take the house now, and you can just go wherever you came from. So, like, it was, I think, an up-close experience with many injustices like these ones, and just feeling helplessness, to like say, yeah, because nobody can help you, it's like life is tough and then it moves on. So I really just didn't want to feel that helplessness, and law felt like the only way I could, get that, control the situation, so to speak. So yeah, when I was participating in Tibetan public speaking, people would always say, hey, you should consider these avenues, you should consider law because but I wanted to do medicine actually, I was like, medicine would give me the money, so, but yeah, I guess I kept gravitating more and more towards law.
I understand. Thanks for sharing that as well. And obviously, I mean, has it helped you in the way that you hoped so far, the study, the field of law, but then also the skill of public speaking and debating? I mean, has that an influence on you in your private life, how you talk to people, or is it separate things, One is more professional or for competitions? and other occasions are private conversations, or is there any?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. Very interesting question. I remember having a conversation with someone about, like communication and relationships. And I would say my takeaway from that, which I'll export to this conversation we're having, is I think, first of all, it depends with the person. But I'm the person that can really say I've benefited from debate, even in my personal conversations. It's like it forms this worldview that makes you communicate better, I think. So, for example, if we'll be having an argument, like most arguments in relationships, it's like, I hate that you don't want to walk the dog. And I'm like, I hate dogs. And then you're like, you had dogs. You never told me you had dogs. And then when did I say that? And then the voices are raising and you're screaming and nobody's listening to the other really. Mm-hmm. But, in debate, and this is something that I used to always get questioned, about, by my exes, like, like you really listen, because I would try and just listen to what the person is saying and not interrupt. And that would always come as a surprise, like, okay, like, because you have to really listen exactly to what the person is saying in debate and not misquote them, and not, because that's really embarrassing then if you're saying somebody said something that they didn't say, So yeah, for me, I've always been like more of a listener. So those skills of really good listening, and also you need them in law, because you have to really listen to every minor details. They sort of like interrelate. But I've also seen other debaters that, very bad communicators in relationships, because like I said, it depends with the person, they get more emotional, even if this is a skill that they could use. So yeah, I guess I would say it depends with the person.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it's actually so beautiful that the power of speech is actually very closely related to listening, right? I mean, it sounds like opposites, but one is needed for the other.
Exactly.
The bit of yin yang.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually, that's the best way to capture it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that answers maybe another question I would have for you is if you could share some of your tips and secrets that have helped you. I mean, I believe impromptu speaking is obviously not really something you can prepare for because you wouldn't know the topic. But maybe there's still things you would do in advance, Is that the case? Or?
So, yeah, the thing with really being a debater is sometimes people may think you have lost your mind, because there is a lot of talking to yourself, because you have to sort of practice that, you just see a lady wearing Louis Vuitton glasses and walking her dog, and then you challenge yourself, let me make a short speech about her. Oh, how stunning her stride is with that fluffy dog and that colorful leash that she has. The way the rhythm is so like a ballet dancer, it makes me really want to get on a beat and feel like Tupac. Am I speaking about Tupac? Who the hell is Tupac when I have six packs on my tummy? And then you just, by the end, you're just like, wow, okay. And then, you try and find your rhythm then. And then you always know, okay, so if I get an impromptu, I always do well if I sort of involve the weather, or if I sort of involve how the person looks, or if I sort of am more philosophical. So indeed, there's things that you can do before, to like sort of find how your rhythm comes into motion, But yeah, sometimes all that preparation really doesn't help, because it's like maybe just a very brand new concept or something that is just so, it looks so easy and it is so hard, someone can just say water, and it's like, there's so many things you can say about water, but you also don't want to sound, like you're overdoing it. So it's always that balance, of saying, am I overdoing it? Am I like really in sync with what's required? But yeah, I would say maybe if you, have a private corner by yourself where you just talk, and because if you walk around doing that, people are like, what's going on with this guy,
It's very playful also, and I would like to come back to that. But in between, quickly, the question about languages. We heard you speak 6 languages. So would you debate in all these languages, or do you have preferred languages, or some languages only? I mean, only. How many languages are you comfortable in to debate?
I mean, we, for professional debates, it's only in English, so they are only hosted in English. Yeah, that's because also a country like Zimbabwe, we are the country with the most official, with the record for the most spoken official languages. Like many countries have more languages than Zimbabwe, but not all of them are officially recognized. And Zimbabwe is the most recognized with 16. So you can imagine there's like a need to like facilitate, discourse, like to have a lingua franca, and that's where English comes in. And obviously we were colonized by the British, and so it's not uncommon even during debate tournaments to find people because in debate you get a topic 15 minutes before. And then during that 15 minutes, you and your partner have to go through the arguments. What are we going to say? What are they going to say? How do we counter what they're going to say? What are the guys who are going to come after us also going to say? And how do we, tie what we're going to say with what they're going to say and what has been said before? So it's a lot of, and in those discussions, you find people really using, like Zulu or Isindebele, as we call it, Shona, because it's like more, like you really think in those languages.
Mm-hmm.
I would really say I think in my native languages, and I can express myself in English, but in terms of thinking, it's like that. So that's sort of how it is in formal debates.
Very interesting. So internally, you speak multiple languages.
Generally, it depends with the area, So if you're like in Harare, which is like the capital city, you tend to find more Shona, like if you are in Bulawayo, where I come from, you find mostly Zulu and Ndebele, although Shona is also popping up there now because this is like the largest tribe. If you go more to the Victoria Falls, I'm sure you're familiar with the Victoria Falls, right?
I mean, yes,
you should visit it.
Yeah, it's on the list. It's on the list.
Okay. I'll hook you up with some contacts that can make your experience worthwhile when the time comes.
Oh.
But if you are there in Victoria Falls, you'll find more Tonga or languages in that region. So people are always talking in so many languages,
But you yourself internally, now you're in Switzerland, obviously, would you, your self-talk would still be in one of these languages?
Oh yeah. So the funny thing with my friends, when we call from Zimbabwe, is especially if you grew up in Bulawayo, this is sort of like a melting pot. You find, so most people from Bulawayo, they would speak Zulu, Isindebele, they would speak Shona, they would speak Isikanana sometimes, and so you start a conversation in one language, but by the time you finish, it's in another language, or you've changed 3 or 4 times because, there's different emotions.
Wow.
There's different emotions that like are more appropriately communicated in a different language. Like if I really want someone does something that pisses me off, I would swear at them potentially in Isindebele, because that's just like my reflex action. But, if I want to be more maybe romantic, or if I'm talking about something that's maybe I'll use Shona because, it sounds better for me, or vice versa, actually. But we like doing this with my friends because when we're away from home, this is the only way that you can sort of feel like you still have that connection, So, yeah.
Understand. Yeah. And obviously, you've just mentioned that you're away from home. And you're talking first-time experiences here. I would like to talk about your first times for, moving out of, let's say, Zimbabwe, then Africa, coming to Europe. And obviously, you're also multilingual in Zimbabwe itself, but then also how has your interest and knowledge of languages helped you maybe also in this journey? And in general, your experiences with moving to new cultures.
Well, I would really say if there was someone who could have, not dealt with this move in as difficult a way as it would have been, that person would probably be me. Because when I was young already, I was like always doing unconventional stuff. I remember at 16, I, just wanted a job, and the only job you could get was to be a teacher, So I couldn't get a job in the city though, because everybody wanted to have a job in the city. And even, the more experienced people were, the competition was bad. So I boarded a bus and I headed to like a rural area called Shorocho, and there were still thousands of people there, but, I made it, and this was like my first time working in the villages where there's no network reception. For you to call someone, you have to like really climb the mountain and like have your phone charged, because there's also no electricity, and hope this person is going to be really available at this time. So, and then after that, I went to advanced level and then university, which was a different city. I had to survive by myself, and so, yeah, I mean, and it's pretty interesting that you mentioned the languages, because I really think I saw a connection, when I arrived in Switzerland. I was in Fribourg first, and yeah, Fribourg is like a French-speaking city. Bonjour, comment vous allez? And it was firstly for me to learn French, it was more like to survive, because these guys would just come and start speaking in French. But because you understand money, you're like, I had money there. What's this guy saying? Je cherche un personne ou bien du, j'ai un travail. My French is going away, but then quand tu peux travailler, venez ici, et je vais donner 2,000 par mois comme ça. And then you're like, I'm hearing 2,000 francs, okay. And so because you really want to make it, you start getting in those circles and you're like, okay, I'm understanding something here. So I thought, most of my friends who tried to learn French, who tried to learn German when they were French, would sort of get confused in like the genders, for example, because in French you'd say la lune, right, for the moon, or you'd say, so la lune is feminine in French, right? Yeah. But in German it's what? It's der Mond, oder? So you end up putting wrong articles because you're thinking that's just how it's supposed to be. But because I was already sort of speaking different languages at home, even in the house, like it was not so hard for me to sort those languages differently. Like I just, would understand that, okay, this is just how it is in French, because, when you learn them as a child, it really helps, and many Zimbabweans cannot, like make that distinction. And I'm always laughing when I'm hearing someone who's shown and trying to speak Ndebele, because there's that heavy accent that I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, with me, it's, I sort of can feel lucky that I can speak both without you telling, like which one am I native in, so yeah.
So in addition to having a talent for public speaking, I mean, it kind of goes together maybe in some aspect because it's about language, right? That's really, it seems to be your thing. So and or could we say then that speaking languages or your interest and also talent for different languages has helped facilitate the move from Zimbabwe to Switzerland or from Africa to Europe?
I would say so, because, the Swiss are very individualistic. You know this yourself, being Swiss, like in Zimbabwe, I sit on a train, I get bored with the journey, I start talking to the next person. Hey, man, what do you think about that car out there? This guy must be making a lot of money and have a good day, nothing big about it. But in Switzerland, you try that, people may think, what's wrong with this guy, So you at least need a social circle that you can call home, Mm-hmm. And it's even more difficult to learn German in Switzerland because of the fact that everybody speaks Swiss German and you are being taught standard High German, So, yeah, it really helped me that most of my friends said, we will talk to you, Brian, only in High German, So that sort of managed to help me cross that barrier of not understanding what everyone else is saying around me while wanting to still learn, High German. And, obviously being someone who also likes football when you're in a football team, mm-hmm. And then, they talk to you in High German, but because they're always talking in Swiss German all the time, you end up, having a good ear for Swiss German also, So I would say also just as a piece of advice for people who also move, to like always be involved with, events and activities like this, like if you're someone who can sing, just go and join a band, like have some sort of life, and you will realize how like much of an integration really you can make, as opposed to if you just also complain and say, yeah, this is bad and nobody speaks what I want. And then inadvertently people get into this English bubble where they're always speaking English with certain friends, and it's, that's the world they live in. But there's so much else that you miss out, I think.
So do you feel like you have kind of two homes now, or have you had moments of feeling home abroad or in another culture?
Yeah. I really, like from a legal practitioner, from a lawyer's point of view, I think there's so many things that need to be worked on, from like this Swiss government's perspective, and also some aspects of conservative Swiss culture. I mean, don't get me wrong, Switzerland has a lot of beautiful laws and beautiful rules, like the idea of it being one of the only true direct democracies stands out. This is really amazing that citizens participate in each and every decision that is being made. But, like as a lawyer, you hear of cases like, I can't remember the canton, but there's a lady that was raped, for like 11 minutes. And then, they were trying to have this case be argued at court, and the court essentially said 11 minutes is not that bad. I mean, the rape is bad, but 11 minutes is not so long. And I was thinking, how long should a rape last, So like, or, like some approaches that the Swiss government will take in some cases will leave you thinking, okay, like this needs to be, brought forward. But in terms of my interaction with Swiss people, it has been amazing, like I've always felt at home, and like many progressive and cosmopolitan Swiss people that I have met have always, made me feel like, hey, like we really want you to know that you are welcome. And this is the good thing about Swiss people, really, that I like about you guys, that when you eventually open up to a person, even if in the beginning it was a bit sort of hard, then it's for real. It's like really, it's not the same as, other nationalities, which I'm not going to mention, who are going to be super nice and say, what's your name? Let's grab drinks later. And then the next day you meet them, they're like, who are you? You're like, dude, you were saying I'm the best friend you have ever met in your life. What's wrong? So yeah, I really like that about Switzerland. And I would say I have two homes now. I would really say you captured it well.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think it's always inspiring, right? It opens our minds if we get access to different cultures.
Mhm.
And so I think the environment you're in professionally is not the easiest, because I think there's a lot of competition. I mean, we could say that in each legal argument, there's competition, right? Someone wants to win and one party wants to win. And then there's these competitions, more playful. I mean, it's always serious. It's about winning. But where there's hypothetical cases. But then again, in real life law cases, it's also about winning. And some of the prestigious and probably most influential positions in law are also rare, right? So, for example, positions at the International Committee of the Red Cross is not something you can easily get into. And even practicing law in Switzerland as a lawyer, right? You have to go through processes and tests, exams, and so on. How do you stay motivated in that?
Fantastic question again, Regula, because like to just sort of summarize the frustration that many of the legal scholars in my shoes would be feeling. The last time I saw an advertisement from the International Committee of Red Cross was like a year and a half ago. For they sort of do these things where they open up and then they hire like 9 or 10 people in one go, because there are 10 positions. So that sounds a lot, but it doesn't happen every month or 2 months. It happens 1 year, 6 months, or 2 years, 2-year cycles. And when they do that, there's always also like, okay, there's specific things they are looking for. They are not going to just hire one type of person for every position. So they sort of balance it out. So in the end, you realize that there's maybe only 3 positions for people of color. And people of color these days also includes people from Asia, people from other. So it's really extremely difficult for you to find yourself in that situation, even with the experiences or with the experience that you could have accumulated like in these moot courts, because the ICRC is the main sponsor for the International Humanitarian Law competition called the Geneva that I attended in Geneva. So it's the rules that regulate the law of armed conflict, right? What should states do and the like. So you would think that if you participate in these tournaments or competitions and you excel, it gives you most of a chance. But you can imagine there's minimum maybe 20 amazing people being produced by these tournaments every year. And by the time these advertisements are coming up, the competition is piled up so much, not only in that respect, but also in the respect of that some of the requirements that these organizations have for you to work there is that you must have experience in United Nations organizations. Like you must work at the World Trade Organization, or you must have worked at the United Nations Children's Education Fund, some of these UN organizations. And for you to do that, you have to go to Geneva and accept an unpaid internship of a year, in a very expensive city of Geneva, where you're looking at using minimum 3,000 to 3.5 just to at least get that internship experience and stand a chance to be hired more. So it becomes really a rat race where you end up thinking, and I feel bad for a lot of people who become depressed because, you end up thinking, what am I even doing? Like, how am I? And many people give up, they get so burnt out. But with me, I would say I never feel that, because I only do something if I really like it, or if I really feel like, and when I do something and I see, okay, I did my best and nothing's coming out of it, then I sort of piggyback on some of my other skills, then I sort of just sing for a bit, or I write for a bit, or, I do whatever else keeps me going until the next opportunity comes. So it has been frustrating, but I've also had my fingers in a lot of pies, so to speak. So I can distract myself and work on my academic career whenever I feel like, it's the time again.
So that answers a question I would have had for you in terms of how do you deal with so-called setbacks, maybe, right? So you would focus on some other projects you have going on that may not necessarily have to do with law, but are more in maybe say in the creative in the creative field, even though I know for law, again, we talked about speaking and so on, there's creativity needed in there as well. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Now, with regards to the playfulness that we briefly touched upon in the beginning, I see obviously a lot of things that you do is playing. I mean, competitions have this playful character, even though it's about winning. Then there's playing football, right? Similar. You play, it's also about winning, but it's in that sense, probably not the end of the world if depending a bit on the league and everything, if there's a victory or not. Then there's also, now I think you froze.
No,
you didn't. You're still there. You're just shocked at my question. But now, and then you're singing. And I feel with all these, you are the one on stage, right? Or on the field, or the one debating, and there's a jury or an audience. So do you ever also see or put yourself in the audience, or are you really let's say, the stage person, and that's where you thrive?
Very interesting that you ask that, because like for me, I sort of see a red thread that runs through all of these activities, like for example, when we were doing the law competitions, when we were having the law competitions, the general rule is the lawyer should not play to the gallery. So what that means is you should not, like say something and then hear what the people behind you are saying. If they're screaming, then you're like, I guess that's the good point. Let me say more of that. because that sort of shows that you really aren't prepared. You are just winging it, and but to a certain extent, you can play with the gallery to sort of make your point to the judge, because sometimes you are facing a really aggressive judge or a very uncompromising and unaccommodative judge, and you feel that the gallery or the audience is on your side, and so then there's that fine line between the lawyer and the performer, So like, for example, I remember the judges asked me a question when we were in Zimbabwe, and it was really hard, but because we had prepared for the questions, we really had anticipated it. But you also don't want to say, hey, that's so easy, I prepared for it, So I remember just going like, I think the question was, so, in this hypothetical situation, you would have a scenario where maybe the person you are defending, we were on the defense. So there's the defense and there's the prosecution. So the person we were defending was a general who had bombed like an oil field and also a radio station. So a radio station is a civilian objective in the international humanitarian law language. You can't bomb a radio station because it's not a military structure, But you can only do that if you can prove that there's a discernible military advantage. So in our case, our client had bombed this building, this radio station, and the oil field when there was only one person staying in the radio station, which was the commander of these troops, and these troops were in a different area. So there was like 50 people that also died. But then our argument was, hey, we ended the war by killing this guy. So like the judge asked me this question in this moment, and he was so, pissed. How can you even come here with the tenacity and temerity and bravery? These judges, they use these big words, temerity and tenacity and bravery, to say you want to represent your client to not get sent to prison when we have evidence he bombed this place. Are you forgetting Rule 15 of the customary international law? Rules says civilian objectives are exempt. Are you forgetting compendiums that have been written about, and the whole room is like, and you're feeling, oh my God, what am I? So, in this moment, the performer then can help. So then I was like, my Lord, this is really a hard question. I should take a sip of water before I can answer your question.
I feel I'm watching a movie. Yes, go on.
I am not making this up, I just had to drink now also because, and I just had to calm down, and everybody was losing it in the background. They were laughing so much, and they were like, but is he trying to distract? Does he really know the answer? And then I gave the answer, and then, of course, we won. And so there's that fine line sometimes, where you're like, okay, how do I, bring the audience in and try and make my point without really being obvious and still being respectful to the court, hypothetical court. And so I'd say they're really related, So the performer, on stage at SAS is really related to Brian, the lawyer, because at a certain stage, I have to get into the groove of speaking. But I also am, related to, the footballer, because footballers are also people who are trying to put a show. You are trying to outdo the other person, still within the rules of the game. But and so it has been sort of complementary being involved in all these different activities at the same time.
And do you sometimes are you sometimes part of an audience? Or are you in general the guy on stage?
When you mean me in general?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. I am part of it. Yeah. Because this is the inverse skill that you also learn in debate. Firstly, you are only on the stage for 7 minutes in debate. One debate round is 49 minutes. It's not 49 minutes actually, it's like 56 because the judge also speaks in between. So it's close to an hour. So you are listening for 45 plus minutes, you are really an audience. When you are in the football team, you are really listening to the coach, the person who is training. You have seen at SAS also the times where you're on the stage is like really minimum, and the rest of the time you're just constantly interacting with this environment that is churning out, tons of information for you to learn. So yeah, I would say, and also in dancing, because I'm a terrible dancer, despite the stereotype that all people of color can dance,
Yes.
So there I gladly sit back and I'm like, yeah, you guys do your thing, I'm just going to watch you here. But yeah.
You are the first person from Africa that I meet that says he or she can. So it's the first time for me today. But it's beautiful what you're saying about this interplay between audience and performer, right? And again, back to we've kind of come full circle from the start where we talked about listening and speaking and the yin yang and how both is needed. So yeah, very interesting. I would like to wrap up with a bit of a game. I mean, we're talking about playfulness, so let's play a bit. Now, these are going to be 4 more kind of rapid fire questions. We wouldn't go very deep, but it's usually I'll give you a question, you answer it, and if you can say why in a sentence or 2, so not going into the full context, and you can take it lightly. So it should be a bit of fun, so not too serious. But we should really also talk about first times. I mean, what has been one of the first times in your life that you will never forget, and why?
Oh, there is really a lot. But I would quickly go back to last week, because last week I graduated with my second master's. And I don't know if I sent you the attire I was putting on, but I dressed in my traditional Zulu attire, and it was turning heads and people were like, this guy has lost his mind. But yeah, it was me really just celebrating that side in me of Africanness, because I thought, do I really want to be dressed like a European, on such a day that I feel is important for me? And I was really vindicated by many people that were like, wow, this is revolutionary. They were even saying this is cool. So I'm sure I'm not going to forget that.
Maybe you're starting a trend.
Who knows?
Cool. And what's a first time that you would like to create in the near future?
I would like to create the normalization of like people of color coming to practice law in Switzerland, because at the moment it sounds like it's really just a dream, when you say it, because it's like, hey, you have to learn German, and it's such a hard language. And that's why you also don't see many lawyers from other places doing that. But yeah, I really think this should be possible, and I will keep working hard towards this goal.
Very nice. Now, as we're talking law, I would like to ask 2 kind of rapid fire, more legal game questions. So one would be, if you could argue a case in front of your dream jury, where you have people in the jury that have inspired you in your life, who would be in the jury and why? And maybe just maximum 3 people, 1 or 2 is enough.
Okay. So the first person on the jury would be a lady called, do they have to be alive, or it doesn't matter? They don't have to be alive. Yeah.
Can be anything. Can be an avatar. No. If ideally someone who had been human at some point.
Okay. So yeah, it should be a lady called Piety Dube. May her soul rest in peace. One of the most fabulous human beings I've ever met. And, my story has also been sometimes more also luck and hard work, but some of the luck is meeting people like her, because there was a time when I could not have written my exams, to even qualify as a lawyer. And she was like, not on my watch, you are so, you have so much potential. I'm going to pay for you. And I'm always looking back at that act of sacrifice for her as really a big turning point in my life. The second person would probably be my dad. May his soul also rest in peace, because he was such a very, like modern guy. He was a very back then you would hear things, because our culture is conservative. You hear even some women saying, if your husband loves you, he's supposed to beat you, he's supposed to punch you. And these are cultures that are still there, but never saw anything like that from him. He was so modern. You would find him doing the dishes and stuff like this. And, I think really a very solid example of a man. And the last person, I think I'll leave it at those two for now.
Very nice. Yeah. Very nice. And the last one, if you could create a law for Switzerland, one for Zimbabwe, and one for the world, what would these laws be? 3 different ones. Or maybe if they're similar, I don't know. And why?
Okay. I think the law for Switzerland would be people should lighten up a bit, like people should just chill, be good with small talk. There's nothing weird about small talk. Don't, because sometimes I really feel Swiss people are up in each other's business, like what's going on, immediately calling the police on your neighbor or writing things on the wall and not just coming to discuss. So I'll say people should lighten up. And to Zimbabwe, I would say white Zimbabweans are Zimbabweans too, because in Zimbabwe we're having this conversation that because now Zimbabwe is majority Black people, they are now practicing, some Zimbabweans, I feel, reverse racism, where they say, even if a white person is born in Zimbabwe, even if they speak Shona, even if they really are Zimbabwean culturally, they will never be Zimbabwean. And I think that is repugnant and nauseous, really. It's nauseating to think that someone who is so attached to a country is not a Zimbabwean just because of their color. And you say to Zimbabwe and Switzerland and to the world and for the world. Yeah, I think, we should just spread love in the world, less wars and more love, because the history of the world continues to be the same, even if, we expected it would have changed. Now we're potentially nearing World War III, but we thought this is a conversation we would not be having because we've seen how 2 of the first world wars were. So, say spread more love and just less wars.
That's very nice. Thank you. Let's take that as the takeaway for us, more love. And thank you also for taking us around Zimbabwe a bit. I've learned a lot about different places. And obviously I have a guide now to take me to the Victoria Falls. So that's
Yeah.
When was your first time at the Victoria Falls? Do you remember?
Yes, I do, because it's a really big deal. Every Zimbabwean kid has to go there at some point, So I think I was like in grade 6. So that means, because my dad was still around, I remember. I was like 10 or 9. And very, it's one of those memories that are forever etched in your mind. You can't forget it.
Very nice. And I'm so happy to hear that you could do that with him. So this time that remains with you forever, with your dad. Nice. Thank you for your time today. Yes, genau, that's a very typical word that we I wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and thanks for sharing about your experiences.
Thank you very much for having me, Reggie, and looking forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
Yes.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye. You had these wonderful impromptu sequences in our conversation, that really went into music and the rhythm. And I was just thinking it would be so wonderful to have such a sequence about the topic of fasts.
I'll check myself already to standing before you, on a stage where I have to talk about the first time I was bullied. But what's bullying really? Bullying is when society tells you you cannot do what you want to do. Bullying is when your own family tells you you have to pay what is called the black tax because they raised you and the money you get is not your money. So until that point, I'd really been bullied my entire life. But it was that one moment when the bully with his red eyes clearly from having smoked way too much pot, and his menacing grimaces that accompanied his threats when he told me I should give him my money. My hard-earned money. He didn't know me, but he was demanding it still. And what made it worse was he was an officer of the law. Is there law still if this person is asking me to pay for services which should be free? I was about to explode. That was not the first time I was bullied. I had experienced it and I have lived it, but I persevere still. What's your first time? I mean, it's you get the drift. And I don't know if like people understand like the importance of public speaking, not just, for yourself, like and like being understood much better, because until you really learn to do public speaking, sometimes you realize, people don't get the best version of you because it's hard to like really communicate yourself so well. But on a broader level, it's like if there's a guy called Vusi Thembekwayo, I don't know if you know this guy, Vusi Thembekwayo. You must follow this guy. You must check out his stuff. He's a really exceptional public speaker, and he has a very inspiring story, and he explains how, public speaking also changed his life and how people can use those skills in their own lives to even improve their economic, lifestyles, because his speeches are mostly for like, big people, Fortune 500 companies and stuff like that.
I found it so cool that you were drinking Rivella, right? Yes.
Yes.
What was the first time you drank a Rivella, and did you like it?
I didn't like it. I didn't like it the first time. I didn't. I have to be honest. It was such a foreign taste. And I thought, wow, what like, and I was saying, and whether it should be soda, like it should be Coke, or it should be, like apple juice. Like it's like in between. It's like, but now I'm really such a fan of it. I love it,
That's so yeah, because it's a very typical Swiss drink, right? I think they have tried to export it to other countries, but it seems to be challenging. I don't know what reasons are there, but it was just so nice.
It's an acquired taste.